Join our community by subscribing. Every click helps us share more stories like this one. The introduction. The sun hung low over the quiet town of Willow Creek, casting long shadows that stretched across the cracked pavement of Maple Street. It was a Wednesday evening in late autumn. The air was crisp, tinged with the earthy scent of decaying leaves. The neighborhood was typically a peaceful one, with rows of weathered clapboard houses flanking either side of the street, the occasional flicker of a porch light illuminating the gathering darkness. But tonight was different. An undercurrent of anticipation crackled in the cooling air as the residents, many of whom had lived here for decades, whispered fears and suspicions that rippled through the local diner, the church, and the post office. The grisly discovery of a body in the nearby woods had rattled the town, reminding them that even the most serene of settings could harbor darkness. As the silhouettes of old trees loomed ever closer, the police cordoned off the crime scene with yellow tape, emphasizing the gravity of what had transpired. Reporters from nearby towns set up their cameras, the glow of flashing lights illuminating their anxious faces, eager for answers that neither the police nor the townsfolk could provide. With unanswered questions hanging thick in the air, the quaint facade of Willow Creek began to crumble, revealing the more sinister secrets that often lay just beneath the surface. This was a town transformed, the echoes of laughter drowned out by a pervasive sense of dread. The victim. At the heart of the investigation lay a young woman named Evelyn Hart, a familiar face in Willow Creek. At 26, she was vibrant and full of life, known for her infectious laughter and her penchant for helping others. Working as a librarian, her days were filled with the comforting scent of old books and the delightful hum of children's stories echoing through the aisles. It was this very warmth that enveloped everyone around her, friends, co-workers, and even the occasional passerby who would share a smile. Evelyn had her favorite spots: the small cafe on the corner, where she would sip chamomile tea while scribbling in a notebook, and the park where she often volunteered for community events, organizing reading sessions for children. Her absence was already palpable. An emptiness had settled in those cherished spaces, pushing the reality of her fate into the foreground. As detectives pored over her life, they unearthed fragments of Evelyn's ordinary yet enchanting work. Friends recounted her passion for poetry and nature, while others spoke of recent changes in her demeanor. In the weeks leading up to her death, Evelyn had seemed withdrawn, her bright spirit briefly dim. Text messages from her phone revealed unnerving exchanges with someone who went unnamed, a shadow in the periphery of her life, a potential danger masked behind polite words. The cozy town that once wrapped her in safety now brimmed with uncertainty and fear, thrumming with the knowledge that someone had shattered the peace. Evelyn's story had become a haunting puzzle, each piece hiding truths that slipped through their fingers, leading the desperate search for justice into the sinister depths of a once-beloved community. The crime scene. 2 miles from the heart of Willow Creek, the dense woods seemed to swallow the remnants of daylight. Twisted branches reached out like skeletal fingers against the darkening sky. It was here, in this forgotten section of forest, that the search for Evelyn had come to a haunting conclusion. The underbrush rustled softly as officers navigated through the leaf-strewn ground, their flashlights cutting through the thickness of the night, illuminating evidence of chaos hidden beneath the serene exterior of the trees. Evelyn's body was discovered in a small clearing, a place that felt eerily secluded, shielded from the eyes of the world. The paramedics had arrived first, followed closely by the crime scene investigators who cordoned off the area. their gloved hands delicately mapping out the scene. The temperature had dropped sharply, and the cold began seeping into their bones, adding to the weight of the grim task at hand. Surrounding her, discarded items of clothing lay carelessly strewn, now forever tethered to that fateful moment. Twigs were snapped, as if in the throes of a struggle, and where the earth had been disturbed, scuff marks whispered of a violent altercation. Under the harsh glow of floodlights, the environment converted to a theater for horrors long since past, painting a portrait of brutality that was starkly out of place in the tranquil town of Willow Creek. Investigators worked in silence, absorbing each detail. Faint scent of pine mingled with the iron tang of blood, the disarray providing tantalizing clues that refused to unveil their truths. In that dimly lit clearing, the closeness of death felt suffocating, a chilling realization settling that a quiet town had been touched by the profound darkness of human malice. The early investigation. In the days following Evelyn's discovery, the Willow Creek Police Department mobilized with a sense of urgency that had been absent before. The office, usually a place of minor disputes and noise complaints, buzzed with conversations infused with a mix of sorrow and determination. Chief Ray Maloney, a local with years of experience etched into his weathered face, stood solemnly at the helm, directing his officers in what felt like an unwelcome departure from routine. Detectives Maria Torres and Brian Keller were assigned to lead the investigation, a task they undertook with the weight of their own memories of Evelyn. They began at the library, combing through her last days, speaking with co-workers and patrons. Each interview added layers to the burgeoning narrative of her life, painting a vivid account of a young woman who would not hesitate to lend a hand to others, yet seemed haunted by unseen trouble. The officers dug into Evelyn's phone records and social media accounts, connecting with friends and acquaintances to gain insight into the mystery of her last few weeks. A pattern emerged: had distanced herself from friends, confiding in fewer people, and often receiving odd messages late at night. A shadowy figure surfaced in their inquiries, a man named Derek Reynolds, once a close friend who had grown increasingly possessive of her affections. Yet he wasn't the only one with ties to Evelyn that raised red flags. Meanwhile, the search for physical evidence continued. With painstaking diligence, evidence technicians scoured the crime scene for any items that might reveal more about her last moments. Time ticked on, and with every passing hour, hope intertwined with fear. The tight-knit fabric of Willow Creek now threatened to unravel further, as the investigation hinted at a web of entanglements, secrets, and lurking dangers in the life of a woman who had once seemed utterly free. The dead ends. As the first week of the investigation wore on, hopes of swiftly apprehending a suspect began to wane, leading the detectives into a labyrinth of dead ends. Chief Maloney held daily briefings, his brow furrowing deeper with each passing day as they scoured the evidence collected from Evelyn's life. New leads appeared only to fizzle out into false hopes, keeping the tension thick in the air like an impending storm. Detectives Torres and Keller quickly discovered that Derek Reynolds had an alibi, verified by a friend who was with him on the night of Evelyn's disappearance. The clock ticked on, pushing them to assess other individuals in her life. Each name they pursued led them back to a familiar ring of acquaintance, depicting a young woman adored yet encircled by complexities. While friends painted a picture of supportive gatherings, reluctant secrets began to swirl around the edges as whispers of romantic scuffles and hidden jealousies surfaced beneath the townsfolk's polite exteriors. Among Evelyn's closest friends, Margaret Lane stood out. Initially cooperative, Margaret's answers became more constrained under pressure. As the detectives pressed deeper, asking about her last known interactions with Evelyn, they noticed the slight tremor in her voice and the sheen of perspiration forming at her temple. Days later, Margaret's account would change, her narrative tangled and slippery, leading nowhere substantial. With each unfounded lead and shifting narratives, frustration mounted. The town, once protective of its own, began to crack as murmurs of suspicion echoed through the whispers of residents. Blinds tightened, doors closed. Just like the fallen leaves, the once vibrant connections between neighbors began to wither under the weight of an unsolved murder, threatening to leave the community only with shadows of the past. A break in the case. Just as the investigation seemed to stall, an unexpected break flickered into view. It came in the form of a phone call that jolted Detectives Torres and Keller from the stagnation that had settled over their desks. The voice on the other end belonged to an anonymous tipster, someone who had heard the reverberations of gossip drift through the town and decided that it was finally time to speak. Within hours, they arranged to meet the caller at a local diner, a place drenched in nostalgia, with stained red vinyl booths and a jukebox echoing old country tunes in the background. The scent of coffee mixed with the lingering aroma of fried food filled the air as the detectives entered, tension threading through their minds like electricity. The tipster, an unassuming middle-aged man named Frank, sat quietly in a corner booth, his hands wrapping anxiously around a chipped mug. He recounted a harrowing tale that held the potential to shatter the investigation's impasse. 3 days before Evelyn had gone missing, Frank had observed a heated argument in the park involving Evelyn and a stranger. He described the man as tall, with dark hair, and tattoos creeping up his forearms. Though he hadn't thought much of it at the time, a gnawing feeling nudged at him days later as news of her death spread. Out of conscience, he reached out, hoping to help. The detectives' hearts raced as they wrote down meticulous details. Frank's description hinted at someone knew someone who had not yet entered the focus of their inquiries. They left the diner with a newfound sense of purpose, eager to follow this lead into the depths of the community's underbelly. The flickering candle of hope reignited in their minds, illuminating the shadows that had once obscured their path. The suspect. The next day, Detective Torres and Keller wasted no time in tracking down the man Frank described. His name was Nate Simmons, a local tattoo artist known for his vibrant inkwork and brooding demeanor. Though Nate had established a reputation as a skilled artist, the whispers surrounding him suggested a life tainted by reckless choices and brushes with the law. As they approached Nate's small tattoo studio, the atmosphere thickened with anticipation. It was tucked away on a side street, the faint sound of tattoo machines humming softly within. Brightly colored murals adorned the exterior, but inside, the walls were cloaked in shadows, a stark contrast to the vibrancy of the art outside. The moment they stepped in, a tingling sense of unease washed over them, as if every piece of art bore witness to secrets long buried. Nate was seated on a stool, his focus broken as the detectives introduced themselves. The tension ramped up in the air as Keller explained the purpose of their visit. The artist's casual demeanor shifted subtly, his expression morphing into something more guarded. They inquired about his whereabouts on the night Evelyn disappeared, and he provided an alibi that he was working on another client later than usual. However, his fidgeting hands betrayed him. fingers drumming nervously against his thigh while he maintained eye contact just slightly too long, as if gauging their next question. The detectives pressed further about his connection to Evelyn, only to hear vague accounts of casual acquaintanceship, their paths crossing at local events. But there was something in the way he avoided direct answers, as if he knew more than he was willing to confess. They left the studio with his name committed to their files, an unsettling feeling settling deep in their guts. Nate Simmons had emerged as the kind of puzzle piece that could either expose the truth or stretch the investigation into darker corners of deception. The trial. Weeks turned into months as the investigation unfolded, ultimately leading to the moment that Willow Creek had both anticipated and dreaded: the trial of Nate Simmons. The town hall, usually a hub of community meetings and local celebrations, transformed into a sanctuary for courtroom drama, filled with spectators' friends, family, and morbidly curious residents who had followed every twist of the harrowing tale. As the trial commenced, the somber atmosphere settled around the room like a dark fog. The prosecution painted a meticulous picture of motive, opportunity, and ultimately violence. They connected the dots between Nate's spiraling behavior and Evelyn's tragic end. Testimonies from witnesses, including the vital account from Frank, were presented, outlining the escalating tensions and the suspicious nature of Nate's alibi. The defense, on the other hand, seized upon the ambiguity of the evidence. They argued that Nate had become a convenient scapegoat, the character of a troubled artist, malignantly misinterpreted by the eyes of the town. They introduced witnesses who would speak of his compassion and inclusivity, painting him as a misunderstood figure who merely held an odd friendship with Evelyn before things went amiss. Each rebuttal wove a web of uncertainty that kept the jury guessing. As the last of the witnesses stepped down and closing statements began, the gravity of the town's collective fears and hopes spiraled to a tense climax. Detectives Torres and Keller watched from the second row, their hearts heavy with the echoes of Evelyn's laughter that had filled the library. The outcome was uncertain. Anxious tension hung thick in the air, with every resident held captive by the impending verdict. Some felt a powerful sense of justice in sight, while others harbored fears of a twist that could leave the town haunted forever. The gavel finally fell, a sign that the moment of truth had come at last. A sense of anticipation engulfed everyone as the jury began to deliberate, leaving the room cloaked in silence, an entire community suspended between hope and despair. The aftermath. With the jury's verdict echoing through the courtroom, the town of Willow Creek stood poised on the edge of a new reality. The decision had been rendered. Nate Simmons was found guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Evelyn Hart. While some residents erupted in applause, others in disbelief, the aftermath swept over the community like an unexpected storm, leaving everyone to navigate the changing tides. In the weeks following the trial, the air felt different, heavy with unspoken words and unresolved feelings. The sense of closure that once beckoned seemed elusive. Evelyn's absence was still profoundly felt, haunting the scenes of her life via missing librarians, cheerful laughter replaced by the echoes of sorrow. Friends gathered at her favorite spots, yet the vibrancy had dimmed as they honored her memory. Whispers of grief blending into distant conversations about the future of their small town. Life in Willow Creek resumed, but it would never be the same. Bitter divides emerged among neighbors. Those who had championed Nathan's innocence still clashed with others, convinced justice had been served. The fabric of community trust began to fray, festering beneath a fragile facade of normalcy. Children were warned to stay close, and doors were locked more tightly than before. The quiet, small-town life had given way to a persistent undercurrent of anxiety and mistrust. Detectives Torres and Keller, though dedicated professionals, bore the scars of a case that had shaken their own beliefs about human nature. They continued to reflect on what had unfolded, questioning not only how sorrowfully accurate their instincts had been, but also how they could mend the rift in a town that now felt like a fragile living thing, barely clinging to a sense of unity. In the stillness of night, when the shadows grew long, the memory of Evelyn continued to whisper through the rustling leaves, urging those left behind to remember. In grappling with the remnants of sorrow, the hope for healing began to take root, a reminder that even amidst darkness, there lingered the possibility of renewal. Reflection. In the quiet of her childhood bedroom, Evelyn's mother sat surrounded by fading photographs and remnants of time spent together. Whispered laughter, the festooned memories of a birthday party, the books that had woven stories into their lives. The sunlight streamed softly through the lace curtains, casting delicate patterns on the floor. Sitting in the stillness was a profound absence that would never fade. As the town continued to grapple with the consequences of the trial, Evelyn's mother pondered the life her daughter had lived. Every tale told in hushed voices reminded her of Evelyn's passion for life and the deep connections she had fostered in the community. Yet the overwhelming shadow of her loss left an ache that would forever etch itself into her heart. In the wake of tragedy, the town slowly pieced itself back together, holding onto fragmented memories and finding new ways to cherish the lives they lived in Evelyn's honor. They discussed creating a scholarship in her name, a way to promote literacy and imagination in future generations, symbolizing resilience amidst heartache. Change wore many faces. The darkness that had once threatened to extinguish the light of Willow Creek now offered a lesson in vulnerability and unity. As Evelyn's spirit lingered on through words and stories, the community learned to reflect not just on the tragedy yet to pass, but also on cherished connections, reminding one another of how fleeting life could be and how vital it was to hold those we love a little closer.